Good evening, everyone. This is Dr. Vijay Samble, working as a head medical affairs with the Uric Pharmaceutical. I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome all the delegates and the eminent faculties available for this webinar. Uh, we are very pleased and very honored to organize this webinar on the topic of use of immunomodulators in critical illness. For today's session, we are blessed to have Dr. Kapil Jirpe sir from Pune. He is the head of neurocritical care unit at the Ruby Hall Hospital, and sir is the past president of ISCCM, and he is the office bearer of Sepsis Forum of India. And I also like to thank you, Dr. Kapil sir, for giving this opportunity to associate with Sepsis Forum of India to organize this scientific webinar. Now, without wasting too much of time, I kindly request Kapil sir to take the session forward. Before that, I request all the delegates to share their doubts or queries on the options provided on the web portal, so that will be addressed during the panel discussion. So Kapil sir, it's all yours.
Yeah. Good evening. I know we all were quite busy in COVID, and fortunately, we are coming out of this second surge. So, I'm delighted that this is the right period to discuss some non-COVID along with the COVID. I always say the COVID taught us a lot many things. It's not the only mortality, morbidity, and we have seen the surge first week, second week. COVID taught us so many things in management of the patient, discipline in management of patient, how to investigate the patient, how to follow the patient, how to maintain the data records and everything. So we are all aware that the sepsis is not new to us. We know that sepsis is there since so many years, and the mortality is coming down because of the pragmatic approach, and our knowledge get improved during the understanding of the sepsis. But again, the COVID taught us that there are so many things we can still learn to need to learn about the sepsis. Like for example, we were discussing about the host dysregulation or immunodeficiency or role of the immunomodulators in sepsis, but we never bother to follow them very meticulously like what we are doing during the now COVID. Everybody talks about the immunomodulator. Everybody talks about the immunodeficiency. Everybody talks about the timing of immunomodulator. Everybody talks about the choices of the immunomodulator. But whether it is same with the bacterial sepsis, have we missed in our previous practice in the non-COVID era regarding following these biomarkers, following this body host dysregulation syndrome? That is what now generating a lot of interest amongst the intensivists, physicians, clinicians across the globe. And that's what the purpose of the today's webinar about sepsis. So it is not necessarily related with the only viral COVID sepsis. It might be the bacterial sepsis also. And there are two eminent speakers with us, Dr. Deepak Sogani and Dr. Virag Shah. They are going to talk about the role of the immunomodulators and immunological dysregulation and the therapeutic approach in sepsis, ARDS, or pancreatitis. So before I hand over to the Dr. Deepak, let me just introduce the Sepsis Forum. Sepsis Forum is an organization, it's a registered society last year. The main aims and objective of the Sepsis Forum is to create awareness and the spread knowledge about the sepsis management across our medical fraternity. It's not the political society. There is no membership access for this Sepsis Forum. We just create this platform for a discussion related with the only sepsis and the sepsis management. So with this short introduction, I will now invite Dr. Deepak Sogani. He's a MD Medicine and Senior Consultant at the Mittal Hospital and Research Center, Ajmer. And he's a member of the Indian Stroke Association, World Stroke Organization, American Diabetes Association, API, and RSDI. So he's a very well placed in his practice, and he's a senior and the experienced person. And I'm sure he's going to justify his topic about the immune dysregulation and therapeutic approach in sepsis and ARDS. So his subset will be sepsis and ARDS, and which are the various choices about the immune dysregulation and its management. So Dr. Deepak, please proceed. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kapil. I'm really humbled by your kind introduction. I would like to share my screen now. Can you see my screen? Is my screen visible? Well, welcome friends. Good evening to all of you. As Dr. Kapil rightly pointed out, we are going through a phase where there's a lot of transformation going on. Understanding of the disease is getting better day by day, but still we are lagging. In this sense, we are unable to place where we should stand as regards immune dysregulation, how to manage it, how to approach the particular problems which are facing us in this COVID era. This is where we come with discussions, and this is where everyone's viewpoint is going to help us understand this problem better. Immune dysregulation and therapeutic, our approach to sepsis and ARDS. This is going to be a topic for today. And what are the immune modulators which are present to us in dealing with this situation? How we are placing them vis-a-vis one another, and how they are going to help us. Is this what we are going to discuss in the next few slides? It's well known that there's altered immunity in the critically ill patients. And most of the critically ill patients are suffering not only from infection, but are undergoing an inflammatory response, and which is usually critical and which usually causes all the problems which you are facing right now in these patients. There's immune dysfunction, and this is common in critically ill, directly affecting patient morbidity and mortality. There's, however, immune system is frequently overlooked, partly because it is complex in its derangements and we are unable to understand it properly, and partly due to the inability to assess its routine biomarkers such as C-reactive protein, procalcitonin, or numerical distribution of leukocyte subsets, because these particular tests markers are not available at every center and we cannot evaluate them properly. So this is a problem which we face routinely nowadays in most of the small centers. But when there's immune dysregulation, there's also immune activation. The immune activation includes several components of the immune system. This could be physical barrier to tissue invasion, an innate response mobilized within minutes of a new threat, like neutrophils progressing to the site. And then there's an adaptive component, more time for activation, but once activated, they have a specificity and a memory. Now, each of these elements are altered in the critically ill patients and have to be addressed separately. There's increased vulnerability to infection and to the systemic consequences of a dysfunctional defense response. So what happens is patients with critical illness, they respond differently to an injury. This slide clearly depicts two sets of patients. Patient A, who undergoes a pronounced inflammatory phase characterized by increased production of tumor necrosis factor alpha, interleukin 1s, interferon gamma, and IL-12. So what you see, there's few early days, then there's a response, there's a regain of immunological homeostasis response, and survival comes into play. Over a period of time, this happens. But in type 2 patients, what happens is the initial response is weak, but the patient goes into a suppressed immunosuppression. And this goes into phase 2 problem, where this is characterized by increased production of thymosin and 2 alpha cytokines like IL-10 and IL-4. And once homeostasis comes back into play, the survival comes into play. But this could be a persistent immunosuppression because of viral reactivation, secondary infection, and this could lead to increased mortality. So what is cytokine storm? This is immune system's response to infection or injury. It is, but it is also aggravated, and this is what's causing the problem in most of the patients. There's interaction between innate immune cells, there's neutrophils, monocytes, dendritic cells, and exogenous pathogen-derived or endogenous molecules. So this clash leads to multiple problems. In this, the innate immune cells become active. They are upregulated, and the cellular function is in the sense, there's phagocytosis, there's intracellular killing, antigen presentation is there, and cytokine release is there. The cytokine releases in its place causes pro-inflammatory mediators like tumor necrosis alpha, IL-1B, neutrophil chemotactant IL-8, and the acute phase reaction promoters like IL-6. These are exaggerated and concurrent pro and anti-inflammatory responses there, leading to cytokine storm. In all these, neutrophils come into play, and the degranulation leads to multiple problems. So when the uncontrolled cytokine release is there, it links all the problems. There's lung infection, injury, acute pancreatitis, major surgery, major trauma, burns, and this uncontrolled cytokine release causes, in its turn, sepsis, ARDS, MODS, and circulatory failure. What's the sequelae of immune dysfunction? There's a loss of immune regulation combined with shock, infection, inflammation, and or ischemia. This leads to development of the systemic inflammatory response syndrome. SIRS, you well know, ultimately leads to sepsis, septic shock, MODS, and multiple problems, and ultimately death. So what's sepsis? When systemic inflammatory response syndrome is combined in infection, we lead to sepsis. The immune dysfunction of sepsis, what happens is, normally body has mechanism, both oxidative and antioxidative mechanism, which are compensated to each other, and the body responds better and comes out of the sepsis. But when there's a dysfunction of this immune system, the innate and adaptive, both systems are responsible for maintaining this balance. And when they are disturbed, there's increased level of pro-inflammatory cytokines such as IL-6, TNF, and IL-1. There's increased levels of anti-inflammatory cytokines such as IL-10 and IL-1 receptor antagonist. The neutrophils, on their turn, their phenotypic features of activation, there's enhanced spontaneous respiratory burst activity, and there's inhibition of apoptosis. There's less responsive to stimulation by microbial products. There's impaired chemotaxis in response to chemoattractant stimuli, and all this leads to disturbed and dysfunction immune system in sepsis. On the other hand, the adaptive immune response is also dysregulated in the sense there's decreased monocyte expression, reduced number of circulating dendritic cells, and reduced number of dendritic cells in the spleen as such. There's increased apoptosis of lymphocytes, reduced global T cell responsiveness, impaired generation of specific antibody response to a T cell dependent antigen, and there's increased response to T cell independent antigen. All these things, they are in dysfunctional state, leading to sepsis and multiple problems. So immune dysregulation, important component of sepsis. There's an interplay between the cause, the bacteremia, the fungemia, parasitemia, viremia, and others, which initially leads to SIRS. There's a systemic inflammatory response syndrome leading to sepsis, then severe sepsis, and ultimately septic shock, MODS, and death. This is how the graph goes on. In the initial stage, there's infection, then leading to SIRS, which is, as you know, has got its criteria where the temperature is less than 36 or more than 38 degrees centigrade, heart rate of more than 90, respiratory rate of more than 20, or PSCO2 of less than 32 milligram mercury, with white blood cell count of less than 4,000 or more than 12,000, with nearly 10% of them as bands. When this is combined with infection, you have sepsis, and when sepsis is combined with an organ damage, you have severe sepsis. And when there's hypotension combined to this severe sepsis, you have septic shock. So sepsis is induced organ dysfunction, and lethality can be attributed to simultaneous inflammatory and anti-inflammatory response driven by dysfunctional innate and suppressed adaptive immunity. And what happens in ARDS? Again, there's immune dysfunction in ARDS. This pathogenesis of ARDS is more not of infection related, but more of trauma related and inflammatory response related, which is causing ARDS. The pathogenesis of ARDS is multifactorial and involves diverse immune cells of both the innate and adaptive immune system that mediate the propagation of lung injury triggered by an insult. The common cause of ARDS could be pneumonia, sepsis, aspiration, trauma, transfusion, pancreatitis, drug overdose, and respiratory problems. All these can combine and cause ARDS. In ARDS, what happens is there's inflammatory insult. Inflammatory insult, which signals NLRP inflammasomes. This causes activated alveolar macrophages, which in their turn and neutrophils combined cause release of IL-1 beta, TNF, IL-6, and IL-8. These cause neutrophils to degranulate and causing netosis, and macrophages on their turn, when they are destroyed, they cause chemokines interactions with lymphocytes and MSCs. And this in result leads to epithelial damage. There's a decreased surfactant layer. There's decreased potassium ATPase channels, and ENaC channels are also destroyed. And there's alveolar fluid clearance is thereby decreased. This leads to pulmonary edema. On the other hand, there's also endothelial damage. This causes increased alveolar capillary permeability, again leading to pulmonary edema and impaired gas exchange and ARDS. So what our therapeutic approach should be about this? There should be a focused management strategy in sepsis. Yes, there should be. It should be a 6-hour bundle. You should be able to diagnose within 6 hours of the patient coming to you that the patient has sepsis, and accordingly you have to go for multiple things, maintaining CVP, mean arterial pressure, and starting an antibiotic as early as possible and maintaining fluid volume load. The mainstay of sepsis treatment is early appropriate antibiotic therapy, aggressive fluid administration, use of vasopressors if and when needed, and the prompt measures to support failing organs. In this, it is to be noted that you have to obtain blood cultures as early as possible before initiating the first dose of antibiotic, probably from 3 blood sites. What happens in acute respiratory distress syndrome? Again, it is recognized as a distinct clinical entity less than 50 years ago. There is development of rapidly progressive respiratory failure, usually within 24 to 48 hours of the initiating insult. The hospital mortality in these cases is really very high, about 40%, and in some incidences, it goes as high as to 50 to 54%. And it still remains, even after 50 years, not much progress has been done in the improvement of this mortality ratio, and it remains unacceptably high. There's need to develop and test therapies for this devastating clinical condition, and this is a well-known fact. This is where immunomodulatory therapies come into play in therapy, mostly in sepsis and ARDS. The aim of immunomodulatory strategies in sepsis and ARDS, for sepsis, it is to reinstate a balanced immune response to infection, to decrease excessive inflammation, and repair immune refractoriness. And for ARDS, it's long studied that potential therapy for both early and late phase ARDS should be there. The potential benefit should be due to suppression of the pro-inflammatory cytokine response, and potential risk due to immune suppression should be looked into. So immune response, if it is balanced, it leads to sepsis resolution. But if it remains unbalanced, then SRS leads to excessive inflammation, acute organ dysfunction, and early mortality. Or alternatively, it can go into compensatory anti-inflammatory response syndrome, which can either lead to sepsis resolution or it can lead to immunoparalysis and leading to secondary infections and late mortality. So these are the steps which we have to block. There's endotoxin strategies. Blocking superantigens should be there, are being planned. Inflammatory mediators are there. Alpha inhibitors are there. Adenosine A2A receptor agonists have been tried, targeting SOX, PPRs, cholinergic stimulation, antibiotics, statins, all have been tried and used in these stages with less success than desired. The first of the immunomodulators to be used was corticosteroid therapy in sepsis and ARDS. And the recommendations for sepsis and ARDS is that in most of the studies and most of the guidelines which are present to us, in sepsis at least, corticosteroids have not been indicated or not been used. But in septic shock, they are in favor of, if the patient does not come out of hypertension, yes, corticosteroids have been used, whether guidelines are coming from SCCM, ESICM, or Canadian guidelines, or NICE guidelines, or GSICM guidelines, all go in favor to corticosteroids to be used in septic shock and other situations where there's a history of adrenal insufficiency, acute respiratory distress syndrome, community-acquired pneumonia, bacterial meningitis, history of adrenal insufficiency, or corticosteroid use, and sometimes when everything fails, you use it. The multiple studies and multiple authors have come up with their own data. The studies have been published in Kuwait, Bangkok, and Spain. The last one that Spain was done in 17 ICUs, and the criteria of inclusion was PaF2 by FiO2 of less than 200 or equal to 200. It was a multifactorial etiology of ARDS, and within 24 hours of initiating 20 milligram dexamethasone once daily for 5 days, then 10 milligram daily for 5 days was given, and 500 milligram equivalent of hydrocortisone for 5 days or 250 milligram for 5 days was used in a 70 kilogram adult. And the mortality in control arm was 50 out of 138, and in treatment arm is 29 over 139. So risk ratio for death was about 0.39 to 0.85. Another therapy which came into highlight because as such, the acceptance of hydrocortisone or other was not much in sepsis at least. So a combination of cocktail came into play, hydrocortisone, ascorbic acid, and thiamine, known as HAT therapy. HAT has recently emerged as a promising immunomodulatory treatment. Here, ascorbic acid in the dose of 6 grams per day was given, thiamine 400 milligram per day, and hydrocortisone 200 milligram per day. And it was used, it has showed that there's impressive reduction in organ injury and mortality in septic patients when compared to matched controls, both in SIRS and CRS. And randomized clinical trials are currently underway to examine the utility of this regime in patients with sepsis. This brings to another molecule which is present to us and has been widely used, especially in COVID era, ulenostatin. Now, serine proteases are involved in systemic inflammation and cell apoptosis. Ulenostatin is a broad spectrum serine protease inhibitor, and that is why it has been used so frequently and vastly nowadays. And it's found commonly in human urine, blood, and other tissues, and acts at multiple levels. It has a potent antioxidant and both anti-inflammatory properties. It is approved in India by DCGI for sepsis in 2013. What it does is inhibits serine proteases like trypsin, thrombin, chymotrypsin, kallikrein, neutrophil elastase, and cathepsin. And there's a regulation of inflammatory response. It decreases IL-6, IL-1, IL-8, IL-4, and tumor necrosis factor alpha, CRPs, and neutrophil infiltration. And on the other hand, it increases IL-10, the adaptive mechanism of it. The hematological stabilization, it works there also. It normalizes coagulatory disturbances, decreases endothelial dysfunction, improves microcirculation, it improves tissue perfusion, and promotes organ function restoration. There's inhibition of apoptosis, there's antioxidant action, and reduction of mitochondrial damage. So what is the potential mechanism for the effect of ulenostatin in ARDS? ARDS, the common risk factors and the acute pancreatitis. In acute pancreatitis, it causes deactivation of the chain reaction of pancreatic enzymes such as trypsin and alpha-chymotrypsin, lipase, amylase, elastase, and carboxypeptidase, thereby decreasing the risk factor. In multiple organ dysfunction syndromes, it causes suppression of the activation of polymorphonucleosides and macrophages and platelets. In sepsis, again, it causes inhibition of various serine proteases such as trypsin, thrombin, chymotrypsin, kallikrein, plasmin, elastase, and cathepsin. And in systemic inflammation, it causes inhibition of polymorphonucleosides and pro-inflammatory cytokines, including interleukins, IL-1, 6, and 8. So there you see that ulenostatin is acting at all mechanism. It has got multiple anti-inflammatory actions at different levels, both at trypsin, chymotrypsin levels and interleukin levels. And it also causes stabilizations of hematological conditions and inhibits apoptosis of the cells. The multiple studies are there which favors the usage of ulenostatin in both the sepsis and ARDS. In sepsis, the meta-analysis of 13 random controlled trials and 2 prospective studies, including about 1,300 patients with sepsis, severe sepsis, septic shock was done. And it showed that it significantly decreases all-cause mortality with an odd ratio of 0.48 and a Paget-2 score mean difference 3.18, MODS incidence, odds ratio again 0.3, serum IL-6, serum tumor necrosis factor alpha, and there was a significant increase in IL-10 and no difference in the occurrence of in sepsis. Similarly, in ARDS, a meta-analysis of 33 random controlled trials involving more than 2,000 patients compared to conventional therapy, ulenostatin has a significant benefit for reducing mortality, decreasing ventilator-associated pneumonia rate, shortening duration of mechanical ventilation, reducing length of ICU stay, and hospital stay as such. And the phase 2 trials which are going on shows that ARDS treated with ulenostatin had improved lung oxygenation function, reduced duration of mechanical ventilation, reduced hospital stays, and they lower inflammatory cytokines and increased antioxidant activities. We have another molecule which has been used widely nowadays, that is thymosin alpha-1. It's an endogenous 28 amino acid peptide, mainly secreted by thymus. It acts as an immune modulator, exerting great biological influence in activating and regulating the function of the immune system. There's a study which shows that the efficacy of thymosin alpha for severe sepsis. It's a multi-center, single-blind, randomized, and controlled trial. The method they used in China was they performed a multi-center randomized control trial in 6 tertiary teaching hospitals in China between May 12, 2008 and 2010. The eligible patients admitted in ICU with severe sepsis were randomly allocated in a 1:1 ratio, and they conclude that the mortality from any cause within 28 days in thymosin alpha-1 group and control group was 26 and 35%, and definitely showed an improvement in survival rate. can be used in combination both thymosin and ulenostatin. There are multiple studies again. To highlight one or two of them, the LENS study, it considered over 175 patients on one molecule thymosin alpha out of 342 patients, and the dose was used 1.6 milligram thymosin alpha and 3 lakh units ulenostatin twice a day for 7 days. It showed there was a decreased 28-day mortality and a 90-day mortality, and there was also a decreased APACHE 2 score and increased MLA-HRA count. Similarly, another study which is highlighted here is Chen study. Again, they use 1.6 milligram thymosin alpha twice a day and 2 lakh units of ulenostatin thrice a day for 3 days. And then they decreased for 1.6 milligram thymosin alpha once a day and 1 lakh unit ulenostatin thrice a day for 4 days. Again, it showed this increased 28-day survival, increased 60-day survival, increased 90-day survival, and decreased APACHE 2 scores, ICU stays, supportive ventilation time, and treatment with dopamine and antimicrobial therapy. All these studies, they show one thing, that they can be used in combination and they usually benefit the patient in decreasing the hospital stay, decreasing the mortality, decreasing the cost on the society about the treatment cost and everything, and they can be used safely. There are multiple other potential therapies in sepsis which have been used, like JAK inhibitors and all. And yes, intravenous immunoglobulins have been used. Sepsivac has been used. Granulocyte macrophage colony stimulating factors have been used. The interferon gamma, cytosol, therapeutic plasma exchange, and multipotent mesenchymal stem cells have been used. But all these have their own limitations. For example, you cannot use JAK inhibitors along with steroids. You cannot use one molecule Sepsivac alone as such, and GM-CSF does not give you that much benefit as it's desired. Interferon alpha, interferon gamma has its own complications similarly. So to conclude, there's a current evidence which indicates targeting immune modulation improves prognosis in severe sepsis and ARDS. The timing and choice of immunomodulator can be deciding factor in outcomes of severe cases. Targeting immune modulation to prevent cytokine storm with treatments such as ulenostatin can be beneficial early in the course of sepsis. Steroids and ulenostatin have potential for improving mortality outcomes in ARDS patients, and there's promising results with these agents suggest that the potential to be integrated into the routine management of patients with ARDS, sepsis, and we can improve clinical outcomes with this. Thymosin alpha is approved in India for other viral infections like hepatitis B, C, and there are studies showing its benefit in management of sepsis, and lots to be done regarding this. Ulenostatin was approved by DCGI for sepsis and acute pancreatitis in the year 2013 and has been used widely for managing these critical conditions. Thank you.
Yeah, Dr. Deepak, it was quite detailed overview of immunodeficiency and therapeutic approach in sepsis and ARDS. We'll come back to you during the panel discussion regarding the questions, audience question, as well as the few are in mind with this your topic. Now we'll move to the next speaker, Dr. Vitrak Shah. Dr. Vitrak Shah is from Surat. He's a MD Medicine, FNB Critical Care and EDIC, and he's a physician and chief intensivist, head of Department of Critical Care from the Kiran Multi-Speciality Hospital, Surat. So he's going to talk on immunodysregulation and therapeutic approach in COVID-19. So Dr. Deepak spoke about bacterial sepsis. Now Vitrak will going to speak about the COVID-19 and regarding the immunomodulators and their timing. Dr. Vitrak, over to you.
Sorry for joining it late. Actually, there is some problem with my webcam, so I am not able to start my video. So thank you for the introduction. Let us start with the presentation itself. So presentation is visible?
Not yet, sir.
Well, now?
Yes, it's visible, sir.
Okay, so I think Dr. Deepak has already nicely summarized everything, so I may not have to speak so much regarding this. So I would be sharing few details on immunomodulators and what various immunomodulators we can use, and therapeutic approach which we can use in immune dysregulation in COVID-19. So as Dr. Deepak has already discussed, there are various cytokines and chemokines, and due to excessive levels of same, there is cytokine storm in COVID-19 and ARDS and hypoxia, refractory hypoxia is there, and then MODS. So in SARS coronavirus binds to H2 receptor in respiratory epithelium, then it triggers cellular macrophage dendritic cell, then it triggers to release interleukin 6, 1B, 1, 2, TNF alpha 12, and then it triggers polymorphonuclear leukocytes and inflammatory cascade goes on. When there is excessive inflammation, dysregulation of same, then it goes into cytokine storm, which leads to tissue injury, endothelial damage, and ultimately ARDS. So how we can prevent this or how we can regulate this? So there is some innate immunity and adaptive immunity, and ultimately there may be, without any intervention, patient may recover, or patient due to his own immune response or due to immune dysregulation, patient may go into fulminant septic shock. So in early phase of this sepsis, we can use a certain immunomodulator and prevent this patient going into the cytokine storm. And in middle phase or late phase also we can use, but then we may not get the result which we may expect. And patient may be in sometimes early phase, patient may be in inflammatory phase, and in later phase, patient may be in anti-inflammatory phase. So that decision is tricky, and that is always crucial. So there is no single marker that we can say now this anti-inflammatory therapy will work or it will not work. So decision would always be clinical. So what are various immunomodulators which have been tried in COVID? So there are certain non-specific inhibitors and certain specific immunomodulators. Non-specific, most commonly used and proven and beneficial as well as corticosteroids. And most commonly used corticosteroid after last trial is dexamethasone due to its long half-life and more potency. Another one are urinostate, another one are thymosin alpha, then macrolides, azithromycin, hydroxychloroquine, colchicine, heparin unfractionated as well as low molecular ascorbic acid, IVIG. So all these are non-specific immunomodulators, and none of this is proven any benefit except corticosteroids. But alone corticosteroids are not helpful and don't work in severe cytokine storm, and they don't work in all patients. So what else we can do? So there are certain specific immunomodulators. Among them, already Dr. Yugate discussed most of the things. Serine proteinase inhibitor, urinastatin, then anti-cytokine monoclonal antibody like IL-1 antagonist anakinra, IL-6 antagonist tocilizumab, anti-CD26 biologic atolizumab, TNF alpha inhibitor adalimumab, infliximab, GM-CSF, then vascular endothelial growth factor inhibitor bevacizumab, and JAK inhibitors baricitinib, and another thing is passive immunity by convalescent plasma. So among these also they are immunomodulators, so they may suppress immunity as well, and it may harm patient as well by increasing the risk of sepsis and other complications. So we have to decide which immunomodulator is safe for our patients, and not all of these are proven in major RCT. So how we can decide? So we have to choose safest immunomodulator which doesn't have more immunosuppression and any excessive risk of sepsis or side effect. So this immunomodulator which we have already discussed, this figure shows which immunomodulator acts on which level. So we will start with corticosteroids. This corticosteroid definitely helps, as recovery trial has also shown that it has mortality benefit as well. And it is recommended by European Medical Agency, FDA, and WHO as well. So, second one is tocilizumab. So in last year, in first phase of COVID-19, tocilizumab was quite frequently used. In second peak, I think availability was also difficult, and it is not used, and it has not same response as last peak. So although it's recommended by NHC China, by NIH for severe patient but it's not recommended by US FDA, but it's approved by US FDA for cytokine storm, but not for COVID-19. So when to use, how much to use, how many doses to use, there are still we need more data. So definitely many patients have we have seen dramatic response after giving tocilizumab single dose within 24 hours. If patient is on 15 liter of oxygen requirement goes down, but we have seen many patients who have not got response and who later on goes in secondary sepsis, fungal sepsis as well. Third one, when tocilizumab was not available in this second week, second wave, many clinicians have used itolizumab. So it is also not proven that it will help. So we have to use it judiciously and cautiously. Another thing which was used in this second wave is bevacizumab. It is VEGF receptor inhibitor. Uh, it's actually approved for oncotherapy, chemotherapy, but there is ongoing trial of bevacizumab based RCT in critically ill patient with severe COVID-19 pneumonia. So for data, still not strong data, and personally, I have not seen good response. I have seen many fungal sepsis patients after seeing patient receive bevacizumab as well. Now, recently, this monoclonal antibody casirivimab and imdevimab antibody cocktail has been launched, but it is specifically approved for mild to moderate COVID patients who are not on oxygen and for prevention of severe COVID. So we still don't know whether it is very costly and we should in which patient we should use because it may not proven cost effective to use in each and every patient of mild COVID because 80% patient recover without giving any such expensive therapy. Another thing is JAK inhibitor baricitinib. So baricitinib is also used with remdesivir for hospitalized patients with COVID-19 who are hypoxic, and it is approved by FDA. And NIH also recommends if baricitinib patient is having severe COVID and patient is given remdesivir, but only if steroid cannot be used. So this is for baricitinib also there's Act 2 trial which has included more than 1,000 patients and it has noticed 1 day reduction in median recovery time for overall population. But still it's not strong data and we have to evaluate it in subsequent trials and more larger database. So till now, what we have discussed all are modulating immune response and suppressing immune response and having risk of sepsis as well. So there are certain immunomodulators which have no such harm and which can be helpful as well. So one of them is ulinastatin, thymosin alpha, Sapcivac. All these are safe immunomodulators. And they have ulinastatin is already proven of benefit in acute pancreatitis and severe sepsis in patient with before patient goes in multi-organ dysfunction. If we are using that, then it has proven benefit. So same principle applies to COVID-19 in early phase of moderate to severe COVID-19. If we use ulinastatin, if what I use practically in my patients, if CRP doesn't decrease more than 50% in 24 to 48 hours, and patient is having moderate to severe COVID, I start another immunomodulator than steroid, and I'll start with usually ulinastatin. So Dr. Deepak has already discussed details regarding ulinastatin, so we can further discuss in panel discussion. We will go in details. So why ulinastatin? Because there is no obvious adverse effect and it's not that much expensive and it is safer. So definitely worth to try and worth to get more data. So we will not go in further detail because thymosin alpha, personally I have not used thymosin alpha much in patients. So in conclusion, cytokine storm is inevitable. 10 to 20% of severe patient, whatever we do, they may go in cytokine storm and severe ARDS. And in those patients only we have to evaluate all these options and use judicious use of steroids and other safe immunomodulators. So now I will thank you for listening to me and we can move ahead to panel discussion. So any question or anything you want to discuss? Over to you, sir, Dr. Kapil Zepe, sir, and Dr. Ashish Jain.
Thank you, Vitrak Shah, sir, for your beautiful presentation. I think Kapil sir will be taking over the session further, sir, for the panel discussion. For panel discussion till Kapil sir joins, I'd like to introduce our two panelists for the session, Dr. Ashish Jain, sir, and we also have Dr. K.K. Sharma, sir. Both are the leading pulmonologists from the city of Jaipur, and we are very much blessed to have these two eminent panelists along with two speakers for our panel discussion. And we'll just wait for Dr. Kapil sir to join.
Hello, Vijay. Hello. Hello.
Kapil sir, yeah, you
Yeah,
can
yeah.
start sir, panel discussion, sir.
Yeah, he has completed.
Yes, sir. Dr. Shah just finished his session, sir.
Yeah. So now we'll move ahead with the next part, which is the panel discussion. So for panel discussion, I will invite another two faculty. So Dr. Deepak and Dr. Vitrak will be there. Stay connected with us. Now we'll go ahead with the another two doctor who will join our this panel discussion. It's a Dr. Ashish Jain. He's a DNB Respiratory Medicine, ADCCM and FCCP. And he's the associate professor and director of critical care medicine at the MGM Hospital College at Jaipur. Dr. Ashish, you are around?
Yes, sir. Thank you very much, sir,
Yeah,
for
good,
introduction.
Yes, and I invited Dr. K.K. Sharma. He will be the another our faculty, esteemed faculty for the today discussion. He's a MD Pulmonary Medicine, and there are so many fellowship along with his credential. He's a visiting fellow interventional bronchoscopy, Mount Sinai Hospital, New York, and he's a senior consultant HOD Pulmonary Sleep Medicine at Jaipur, at EHSP Hospital, Jaipur. Dr. K.K. Sharma, welcome you on this particular panel discussion. So we have
Good evening, sir. Good evening. Good evening.
Yeah, good evening. We have quite a good audience. We have respiratory medicine people, we have the neurocritical care, we have the intensivists. So today's topic is something related with the sepsis and its immunodeficiency. All of us know that this COVID had changed our, you can say, the practice in managing the sepsis. So I will straightway start with the Dr. Ashish Jain. Dr. Ashish, what was your practice before COVID? Like before February 2020, what was your approach to manage the sepsis? Whether you were doing the biomarkers, you are using the immunomodulators, or you are following the cytokine storm, which are very common word nowadays. We are coming across this. So, what is your practice? What was your view towards the management of the sepsis? I'm talking the pre-COVID era.
So, good evening, sir.
Yeah.
In terms of pre-COVID era, before February 2020, we generally follow all the sepsis guidelines or bundles, and we follow the biologics also. So we usually send cultures along with procalcitonin, along with CRP. But yes, definitely ferritin and D-dimer were not included in that laboratory markers. In terms of use of immunomodulators, steroid would be used when there is septic shock is there. Hydrocortisone in the doses of 50 milligrams 6 hourly usually. And we were able to use some of the other immunomodulators as well, like cytosol we used, The urostatin we use very frequently in the patient of acute pancreatitis, sepsis, as well as in dengue patient also, and some of the dengue sepsis and dengue patient also. And we use initially way back in 2010 when I started my career in intensive care, we used Zygris also at that time. But it was in 2011 it was removed from the market because it does not show any mortality benefit in sepsis. So our approach is very conventional: follow the bundles, and we usually teach to our students also follow the bundles, and all the lactates, cultures, procalcitonin, and CRP level, and follow the trend to the patient. And if a patient is in septic shock, use steroid along with immunomodulators, especially urostatin in my hospital.
Okay, I'll come back to you. I request all the panelists and faculties to make their videos on Dr. K.K. Sharma, Dr. Deepak, Dr. Vitrak, so that we can interact in a better way. Dr. K.K. Sharma, what about your experience? I'm talking about the pre-COVID area regarding the use of the immunomodulators in your day-to-day practice.
Sir, I agree with Dr. Ashish in this regard. So in pre-COVID area, usually we don't go by the markers. Say right now, what we are doing, any patient who is coming and who is coming to OPD even, we are advising at least CRP and D-dimer along with CBC and routine tests to these. So if you ask me about pre-COVID area, any patient who is coming to OPD, I think very rarely we are prescribing this CRP and D-dimer. So now why we are doing this test? Just to see the inflammation, because as we are aware, in COVID, most of the thing which is damaging and which is progressing a disease is thromboinflammation. So two things are very important. One is thrombosis, second is inflammation. To see that, we need to do a CRP and D-dimer, which we are not usually doing in the pre-COVID area. And also in admitted patient. Right now, what we are seeing, if a patient is coming with a lobar pneumonia or a frank pneumonia, which looks like a bacterial pneumonia on a CT or a chest X-ray, still we are going for these tests. And to our surprise, I think you all people are also seeing, and you might agree, that what we are seeing, a patient who is coming with a bacterial pneumonia, we do these markers. And we are finding these markers elevated in many patients despite of being COVID antigen or COVID RT-PCR negative. So this is surprising to me. I'm just asking again a question. Do you guys really see this type of phenomena which I'm seeing? A patient who is COVID negative, who is having a clearly picture of a bacterial pneumonia on CT and still is having D-dimer raised?
Dr. K. Sharma, I will come back to this question because that will in flow we'll discuss about this, and definitely what you are saying is right. Not that's not a topic of interest. Whether this phenomenon is common with the only COVID or other infections like bacterial, parasitic, or other infection, whether they also behave like. Unfortunately, we don't have any data. Unfortunately, nobody studied this thing. Unfortunately, nobody documented this thing. Like we used to have that phagocytic syndrome during the dengue, which is very common, and yes, we have used the steroids very successfully. Mike, we'll come back to that again in detail. My question was, what will be your choices of the immunomodulators in the pre-COVID era? So we can unfold the story slowly with the COVID background.
So, sir, if you ask me in pre-COVID area, I have rarely used immunomodulators.
Okay. So we'll come back to you because that's a topic of interest. Dr. Vitrak, nice to see you. Your video is also on.
Yes, sir, now it's fine.
Yeah. So next question is, what is your experience of the immunomodulators in COVID? Now we have changed from bacterial to the COVID. So the question I will ask 2-3 questions in a collective fashion. What is your experience of immunomodulators in COVID? What were your choice of the immunomodulators, and what timing? How you decided it will be the day 1 or day 5 or day 10, whether it is a clinical or laboratory finding?
So frankly speaking, before before going to COVID, before COVID, I have not used urostatin much, or any immunomodulator, even steroid in any viral pneumonia. I was not using steroid at all. So, but after COVID, my practice has been changed. Definitely, there is totally change in the practice. So I started using steroid, and it's definitely helps. We have seen that it gives us good response, but only in patient with hypoxia or only after 7 to 10 days, and only with remdesivir, not without antiviral. And with steroid, I usually use in patient with severe COVID who are admitted in ICU, or in patients who are relatively stable but more than 6 to 10 liter of oxygen requirement, and patient with initial CRP of more than, this is my practice, no, there is no data behind that. Patient with initial CRP level of more than 150, or patient whose CRP is high but doesn't decrease by more than 50% or increase even after ruling out all other source of infection within 48 hours, then I add ulinastatin in my patients of COVID-19. And I also use Sepsivac. Sepsivac I use relatively early and in relatively less sicker patients. And I found, I don't know, I can't say that ulinastatin has helped or Sepsivac has helped, because I don't like tocilizumab or itolizumab or such immunomodulators much, and because I have seen many patients who are died of sepsis, not of refractory hypoxia. So rather than giving such immunomodulator, I feel that we can add safer immunomodulator like ulinastatin or Sepsivac. So I got good results even patient with more than 90 or 100% requirement, although they take time, 1 month, 2 months, or up to 2.5 months even if patient had 100% involvement and patient was on ventilator. But eventually they recover and they have less incidence of sepsis. So
Okay. Yeah. Dr. Deepak, you would like to add anything? Then I will summarize the both things.
Frankly, as regards our practice, the practice which we are dealing with in Ajmer city, we have been using ulinastatin not in COVID, before COVID also, mostly in pancreatitis patients, and we had used them successfully. In the sense, the patients recovered fast and the ICU stay was decreased, definitely with the use of ulinastatin in pancreatitis cases. This was the most which we used initially. But come COVID era, the use of ulinastatin has definitely increased. Steroids, yes, we were using and we are still using in all cases of septic shock. We are giving a fair trial of steroids, mostly methylprednisolone, not dexamethasone. Methylprednisolone we have been using quite frequently. And this is what the take is right now. As regards tocilizumab, we are not very frequently using it. In fact, to be very true, availability is poor, and whenever it was made available, it was too late to be used. In fact, incidence, as Dr. Vitra pointed out clearly, the incidence of sepsis or infection increased dramatically in most of the patients where we use tocilizumab. So I'm not very comfortable using tocilizumab as such in my practice.
Okay. So what we have discussed in the last 10 minutes, the immunomodulators in pre-COVID area and post-COVID area. Let me tell you my experience in a pre-COVID area. We have used in sepsis, bacterial sepsis, ulinastatin we have used regularly. Hydrocortisone we have used regularly. But Dr. Deepak, one of the trial you have explained the HAT, that is hydrocortisone and thiamine and vitamin C. So vitamin C is the one which is we have used. We have used steroids, we have used the ulinastatin. We never use the tocilizumab, we never use the Sepsivac, or we never use this. So we do not have at current situation any documentation or data regarding the what was our experience in a pre-COVID area. But yes, in pro-COVID area, the one of the most investigated and evidence-based practice of the immunomodulator was a steroid in acute pancreatitis and ulinastatin in acute pancreatitis. Sorry, steroid, ulinastatin in acute pancreatitis. They were using so nicely, and in acute severe necrotizing pancreatitis, ulinastatin definitely makes the difference. So that is the one use of the ulinastatin. Secondly, in a bacterial sepsis, yes, you can use the ulinastatin in a bacterial sepsis. In ARDS, you can use the steroid. So that was another use. So we were using immunomodulators. Unfortunately, we were not able to document or club it in a right fashion, put it in our practice and in a guidelines how to use like a COVID. When COVID come on the platform since 2020 March, we have observed that the word used was very common, was the cytokine storm. So that clicked the discussion about the innate immunity and adapted immunity and the immune response of the body, because viral infections are generally more common with the faster immune response. So they are quite visible. And what Dr. Ashish you have mentioned is very valid point. Unfortunately, even during the H1N1 infection, we know that it was also epidemic and this thing, nobody tried the steroids. I'm retrospectively now, I always felt that whether I have missed those death mortality because of the, I haven't used the steroids in H1N1, because one of my chest physician was always behind me, why don't you use the steroids in viral pneumonia? And we used to say, where is the evidence? But neither we tried to put it on paper, nor we followed the, try to find out the evidence for steroid. So this was the pre-COVID area. And COVID now it is quite clear. We now all understand what is happening with the immunity. We know that what is the pathophysiology of the disease process of the COVID. So it's easy for us after 1 year, I'm in a situation, we all are in a situation to know the which drugs to put at what timing place. For example, if the patient is asymptomatic, there is no treatment. If the patient is hypoxic, you can add steroids. So the first immunomodulator steroid will come into the picture when the patient is hypoxic, then antiviral. On the 7 days or on the 7 to 10 days, if the patient's oxygen saturation is worsening or oxygen requirements are going up, then might be your tocilizumab will come into the picture. And let me tell you, the timing of the immunomodulators, and that's what my question to every panelist, the timing of the immunomodulators makes the difference. Your timing of the your steroids, your timing of the ulinastatin, your timing of the tocilizumab, your timing of the etigilimab, this is going to change. Like what Dr. Vitrak says is a very valid point. He's worried about the sepsis. He's worried about the bacterial sepsis. So if you are adding the tocilizumab in a patient who your judgment says that he will not go on a ventilator, use tocilizumab. But if your judgment and the clinical findings that he may go on invasive ventilation in next 24 to 48 hours, please don't use the tocilizumab, even if it is useful or even it is indicated. And that's what the practice we are following. And believe me, if with my experience of the 1 year, we have used the tocilizumab in a 55 patients. Out of first 20, 18 died because our timing was wrong. Because we have used them in a probably in a late fashion when patient was about to intubate, and all majority of the patient intubated, ventilated, secondary sepsis and died. And next 35 patients, out of that 29 patients survived. I think that makes the major difference. So even today, we asked a very simple question before adding the tocilizumab. What is the procalcitonin? What is the bacterial sepsis? What are the chances of the sepsis you are anticipating? What is the intubation chances in this patient? If no, then use the tocilizumab. Otherwise, don't use the tocilizumab. Okay. So I again repeatedly telling the timing of the immunomodulators matters in your COVID and the non-COVID practice, and that is what the we should always discuss in our this thing. But now I'm coming back to the question to the Dr. Ashish again. Now we have the after 1 year we have the choices of the immunomodulators. We have the steroids, we have ulinastatin, we have tocilizumab, we have Sepsivac. Which one you find safe? At the end of the day, we all are concerned with the safety of our patient. Like Dr. Vitrak is concerned with the bacterial sepsis and the mortality related with the disease. So toci is, there is always risk of the severe immunosuppression and the sepsis is always there. Steroids, you already given a 5 days of steroids and the patient is worsening. So how you choose your immunomodulator and what is the timing of that immunomodulator?
Sir, you correctly said and very nicely said that the timing is most important. At our institute, we have used almost all of the immunomodulators. What we follow here for ulinastatin, any patient who comes with moderate illness, saturation is coming down below 95, he has already started with steroid, and the patient is started requiring oxygen support, inflammatory markers are rising, we started using ulinastatin. You asked me about what is the safest immunomodulator. So yes, after steroid, ulinastatin is my choice, and second is immunosin alpha. I find it very difficult to use tolizumab, tocilizumab because of the risk of bacterial infections. And we have lost so many patients because of the sepsis and septic shock, even after giving tocilizumab single dose. One thing where we cannot use steroids in some of the patients because of the high uncontrolled sugar or some other problem, we use JAK2 inhibitors, baricitinib along with remdesivir in that patient.
Agree.
And if we ask about cocktail, antibody cocktail, I have not used in anyone because it is recently available here. Selection of immunomodulator also depend upon the availability, sir. In Rajasthan, in the second wave, we do not have any of the tocilizumab. Even at that time, we do not have unistatin available in Rajasthan also. So that time also comes to us. And tocilizumab, itolizumab, bevacizumab, everything is very short. Even remdesivir is very short at that time. So availability, patient affordability, patient timing, and which stage the patient is coming to you. If patient has already passed 15 days, already on NIV support in so many days, and already has passed to the cytokine storm, patient is in ARDS, you cannot use anything because nothing will work in that patient. So early use of is
Yeah,
important.
Dr. Ashish, I will just interrupt. When you say the 2 weeks are over, that means you are anticipating now bacterial sepsis, right?
Yes.
Why not unistatin?
So then we start unistatin. I will not use any of the other things like JAK2 inhibitors or tolizumab, tocilizumab. Only unistatin is with me because I can very surely and very confidently use it in sepsis.
Now, what doses you use the unistatin?
Sir, I have used unistatin in more than 1,000 patients. But doses we are using, if patient is critically ill and is in ICU, 10 lakh unit per day for 3 days. Infusion over 24 hours we use. And if patient is in HDU, we use 3 lakh unit TDS. If we have availability of infusion pumps, they are not short, we usually try to give with the infusion pump. But if it is not there, then we give 3 lakh unit TDS also. So it is 10 lakh unit per day for 3 days.
Any complication you came across?
Except a few cases of thrombocytopenia, none, sir. Otherwise, no.
Any renal involvement?
No, sir. I haven't seen any patient of renal involvement. Even I have used them in AKI also.
So you use 10 million unit per day for first 3 days, right? And what about after 3 days?
Sir, we taper down to 2 million unit for next 3 days.
Okay. I will come back to you. It is very interesting.
Yes.
Dr. Vitrag, you would like to add anything to the Dr. Ashish, or you have some difference of opinion?
It's same, but doses I don't use more than 2 lakh unit TDS. So usually I give to BD, but if patient is very sick, then I start with TDS.
Dr. Deepak?
Well, I've used 2 lakh units 8 hourly. That's the max I've used. And for the max period which I have used, this dose is about 4 days. And for next 3 days, 1 lakh unit 8 hourly. That's the most I have used, 7 days at the most.
Okay. Dr. KK Sharma? I am not able to see the Dr. KK Sharma. Okay, probably he has some net issues. So I was very surprised with the Dr. Ashish. You are using, how many patients you said?
More than 1,000 patients.
Yeah, then you should come up with the proper data. That's a huge number. That's a huge number. Let me tell you, that's a huge number. And your doses are also different. What we practice is a 2 million unit 8 hourly for 5 days, and generally we see the response. But 10 million unit for first 3 days in an infusion followed by this thing. I would love to listen your experience of the unistatin, because it's something different you are doing. So,
sir, it started. I'm sorry to interrupt you. Please complete. Sorry to interrupt you.
No, bolo na, Ashish.
Sir, it start in actually in June 2020 because we were looking something to add to our patient. Nothing was there with us. Only SCQS azithromycin was there, and along with steroids. So then we come up with a expert review published in IJCCM written by Yuvan Yatin Mehta sir, and the doses which is given in that paper is up to 1.6 million unit per day. That was recommended by Shanghai doctors. So we searched on the net and we found certain papers also recommending the same 10 million doses in critically ill patients. we followed that thing. If patient is very critical ill, we use 10 million minutes. Patient in an HDU, we give in infusion rather than infusion, give 3 lakh TDS and then taper down.
And what was the timing on day 1, day 2, or day 5, or when
So
you?
it all depends. It depends upon patient condition. The day when the patient starts having tachypnea, low saturation, start oxygen, rise of inflammatory markers is there, we start using uristatin along with the steroid.
No, I'll put in the case scenario. Suppose
Yeah.
patient came to the critical care area, he's hypoxic. So I have started on the steroid, methylprednisolone 1 milligram per kg. I have started the antiviral, lomoregipirine.
Yes.
His IL-6 is around about 45. His CRP is 32. Okay, for reference value.
Yeah.
Will you add the uristatin, or you will wait for the 3 days of the steroid and antiviral therapy, and again recheck with your biomarkers whether they are static or rising or decreasing?
Sir, to be very frank, I generally do not wait for 3 days. We tend to follow daily. If on the second day also, third day also, CRP is rising or D-dimer is rising, I just started uristatin. I do not want to waste 3 days. That is a precious for any patient who is hypoxemic. It may land up in problem
So you have prescribed the uristatin along with the steroid?
along with the steroid.
Yeah, because when you use the paracetamol JAK2 inhibitors, actually they are replacement for the steroid.
Yes, that are
When in
replacement for
uncontrolled
steroid.
sugar or diabetic ketoacidosis, if there are certain reasons where your steroid is relatively contraindicated, or when you are not going ahead with the full dose of the steroids, you may use the JAK2 inhibitor baricetamide in this place. So you haven't used the uristatin like that. You always prescribe the uristatin along with the steroid.
Along with the steroid.
Okay. Let me frankly tell you, I also practice the uristatin in the few of the patients. I don't have the 1,000 cases experience, but I have some 50 plus cases. But what I followed in a practice, whenever the hypoxic patient comes to us, we started with the standard therapy, that is the antiviral, steroids, and the lomoregipirine. After 48 hours, suppose still the patient is hypoxic and his markers are rising, then we used to add uristatin. That is what I continued in the practice for in few of the this thing, and the results were very encouraging. But again, the issue is whether this was a effect of the steroid and this thing, or it is a combined effect of the steroid and uristatin. So we need certain data, and you need to come up with your experience that will give us some idea what is exactly use of the uristatin. So generally we talk a lot about the timing and the doses of the immunomodulators. Dr. Deepak.
Yeah, Dr. Kapil, go ahead.
Yeah, this immunomodulators tends to cause the immunosuppression, that all of us know that. Now we are hearing so much about the mucormycosis. Have you came across any correlation of the immunosuppression and mucormycosis?
We have seen, in our hospital, we have had about 7 cases of mucormycosis.
Yeah.
Just 7 cases. And in fact, we have treated in our hospital, not me as such, but our whole team, we must have treated more than 1,000 of cases. But only 7 of them, 7 is the documented data which we have from mucormycosis. We cannot directly correlate any of immunomodulator to incidence of mucormycosis as such. Because all these patients were, yes, true, they were diabetics, all of them. The age group varied from say about 40 to about 70, 80, and only 7 cases, and all of them. This happened post when we had shortage supply of oxygen, and there was an industrial oxygen supply. That's what we correlated with. Because initially we have an adequate oxygen plant with us, but because of short supply, no supply was being given, and whatever supply which came to our hospital came through government agencies and rerouted through Jamnagar. That was industrial oxygen. We relate this to industrial oxygen usage and high diabetic status, not the usage of immunomodulators as such. That's what we think. But yes, we have not analyzed that in detail as such, but these are the 7 cases which we had.
Okay, Dr. Vitra.
I have, in this second wave, I have treated more than 200 indoor cases, and more than that, more than 500 OPD patients. But only 2 of my patients got mucor. But I have used tocilizumab only in 2 patients. I have used steroid, maximum dose of steroid that was for only first 2 days was maximum 20 milligram per day dexamethasone, not more than that. Usually I start with 8 mg OD or 6 mg BD. And if patient is relatively stable, then I even start with 4 mg OD. And then I titrate steroid dose even as per CRP levels. And I have used only Sepsivac and ulinastatin, not any other immunomodulators. So I don't know whether industrial oxygen causes mucor or not, but luckily I have not bad experience with my patients.
Dr. Ashish?
Sir, I'm agreeing with Dr. Deepak. Though there are theoretically chances that using of tocilizumab or itolizumab or using these monoclonal antibodies increases the chances of fungal infections and bacterial infections. At our institute, we have not correlated directly with the use of immunomodulators. And I have come across 23 cases of mucormycosis this year. And out of 23, 20 were referred from other institute to our hospital, because I'm working in a medical college hospital. So only 3 patients of us developed mucormycosis that were not given tocilizumab or any of the immune modulator except ulinastatin and steroids. They were of diabetic patient, and sugar were uncontrolled in the initial phases of the treatment. So that might be a relation of the high sugar rather than immunomodulators.
Yeah. So we all know that the mucormycosis is on rise. It is epidemic and pandemic, becoming like a pandemic. So if you ask my experience in a month of from 15 April to 15, like Dr. Vitrak says, during first peak we never had any mucor, but in
Never
second peak we have in 1 month from 15th April to 15 May we have around about 72 cases of the mucor. But let me tell you the very distinct finding what I have came across. First thing, all these 72 cases were coming from the periphery and the small nursing home. None of them from the tertiary care center. Even my hospital, Ruby Hall, we had the 480 beds for the COVID, and we have something 2,000 plus admission in a second peak and 5,000 plus admission in the first peak. We never had a single mucor, let me tell you. So, which theory is working, whether it is your industrial oxygen, whether it is a steroid misuse, or your uncontrolled sugars, or a dirty unused mask for the prolonged period they are using. There are so many theories. Let me tell you, none of them is just now any evidence. When I did analysis of the my mucor cases of the 72, I came across that steroids and the uncontrolled sugar are the only 2 factors who correlate with the risk factors. So out of 72, around about 55 cases, the glycosylated hemoglobin was more than 9. That means the uncontrolled sugar and misuse of the or abuse of the steroid are the risk factor, and only creatinine involvement, when the CKD is led to the mortality, significant mortality ratio. Otherwise, even CNS involvement didn't result in the mortality. So that is what I came across. We need to wait for the another major trials or the more experience from the expert. But immunomodulators, coming back to the immunomodulator, yes, they definitely plays a major role in a mucor, because they tends to drop the immunity, and naturally, for example, steroids, it will drop the immunity and that will derange your sugars. And if you are not good with the sugar management during the COVID, you will land with the mucor in future. That's what I am coming to the conclusion. So we will move to the next. So regarding the immunomodulators, now we have the steroids, we have thymosin alpha. You have mentioned, someone mentioned, I think Vitrak or Ashish mentioned the thymosin alpha. So what is your experience with the thymosin alpha?
Sir, I have not used much thymosin alpha because I prefer ulinastatin. And
anyone has any experience with the thymosin alpha?
Not much. We have used it, but not that frequently as ulinastatin.
Yeah.
So I think we have now a good set of the drugs are available. We know much detail about that. We know the which condition to use. So if we use the right immunomodulator at the right time in the right doses, I think patients are going to benefit, and we may carry forward this practice in a non-COVID area. I mean, after this COVID, after 1 year, suppose we landed with a non-COVID area, let's now remold ourselves for the practice in the bacterial sepsis. Okay? For example, the sepsis, ARDS, and acute pancreatitis, these three will be our target areas. Acute pancreatitis already ulinastatin and they are playing a major role. Sepsis, it's bits and pieces, but we need to now follow them with the biomarkers properly. And regarding the ARDS is the one. Like recently, 2 days back, there was a SCCM published the paper on the practice of the lung protective strategy and mortality, and they have came across the 40% mortality in the ARDS, and practices of the lung protective strategy also varied from center. It is in USA. What about India? What about a developing country? So we need to now redo our thinking process and think about the ARDS, how we can improve the mortality in ARDS. Might be the steroids, might be ulinastatin, might be thymosin alpha. These immunomodulators may help in future for managing this particular syndrome. So this is what the today's topic. Anybody who would like to add anything, they are welcome. So I will go one by one with the panelists, Dr. Ashish, then followed by Dr. Deepak, followed by Dr. Vitrak.
Sir, my concluded points are that we should use immunomodulators at right time. Timing is the most important thing. If we miss the time, we miss the bus, we can't catch it, sir. And that is the most important thing in my opinion.
Dr. Deepak?
Dr. Kapil, I personally think that immunomodulators have come to stay with us. It is how we use them and how judiciously and at what time we use, as Dr. Ashish pointed out. That is going to make the difference in the outcome of the patients, both with sepsis and ARDS. Pancreatitis, we had already been using it, especially ulinastatin. As regards thymosin alpha, more needs to be done, more studies needs to be done. Just one randomized control trial is there, and it's not much is being pointed out in that. So let's wait and watch about thymosin alpha. But as regards ulinastatin, I think I'm more comfortable using it now.
Okay. Dr. Vitrak?
Same. Right dose, right time, and right duration.
Yeah, that's what we can get away with this message, that the COVID definitely changed our thought process. COVID forced us to think about immunodeficiency and dysregulated host response and how to diagnose and the timing. Probably up till now in sepsis, where we are concentrating on the source control and the antibiotic and the cultures. I know that is the backbone of the sepsis management. But simultaneously, if we add this adjuvant therapy like immunomodulators, it may help certain percentage of the patients we may survive. And the most important thing, COVID taught us about the biomarkers, the smart selective use of the biomarkers. Again, I am saying the smart selective use of the biomarkers. Okay, which biomarkers, when to do, like procalcitonin, your D-dimer, your IL-6 are going to add in your information. What is happening at the bedside when we are managing the patient? We are more of concern with we want the more and more information inputs from the various lab, our colleagues, from the imaging, from the history, and from the culture, so that we are in a better place to control that sepsis in a time matter. So I think biomarkers, understanding of the sepsis phenomena, understanding about the innate and adapted immunity, then use of the biomarkers, immunomodulators. What are the immunomodulators? What are the choices? What are the doses? What are the timing, and when to use, and how to select your immunomodulators? I always say that in ICU, it's an art. When you're taking the antibiotic, you need to give your best to select your set of the antibiotic for that particular patient. It is not the fixed set for the every patient. Like that, I think immunomodulators also, like if suppose there is pancreatitis, ulinastatin. If suppose there is a septic shock, okay, I will go ahead with the steroids and might be additional ulinastatin. If it is ARDS, I may use the thymosin alpha. If it is a viral COVID, I use all these things, and if required cytokine stop, I will use the tocilizumab. So I need to select my immunomodulators. It's safety with the patient. What Dr. Vitrak said, I don't want the sepsis. Nobody wants the sepsis in the immunosuppressed patient. and then move ahead with the management. That is what I can say we have learned through the today's both presentation as well as the discussion. Thank you. Thank you very much for joining this particular webinar.
Thank you.
Vijay?
Dr.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Dr. Ashish.
thank you.
Dr. Vitrak.
Thank you, Kapil sir, for
Thank you, sir.
organizing and for moderating the session beautifully and bringing out the takeaways and bringing out the clinical practice of all the panelists. And I thank each and every panelist as well as the speaker for spending your valuable time and sharing your experience of managing sepsis, ARDS, and pancreatitis. And we as an organization, URIC, are very much blessed to host this meeting in collaboration with Sepsis Forum of India. And we have created the platform of advocacy for use of immunomodulators in critical ill patient, AIMC. And we would like to take this platform of advocacy for use of immunomodulators to the next level in collaboration with the eminent clinicians like you, and make the patients benefited with the use of such newer therapies in coming days also. So with this, once again, thank you all the faculties. I like to thank all the delegates for their great response even on the weekends. And I thank my technical team and marketing team to help me to organize this webinar. Thank you very much. Look forward to organize
Thank you.
such a meeting.
Good night.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Good
Good
night.
Thank you, sir.